Peter raised his wine glass and smiled slowly, the kind of smile that pretended to be polite but carried something sharper underneath. "Here, to my ex-wife," he said, his voice smooth and controlled. The ballroom went quiet instantly, conversations dying mid-sentence, forks hovering above plates, eyes turning toward the head table. Mirabelle stood alone beneath the chandelier lights, no ring lifted for display, no man seated beside her, no shield between her and the attention pressing in from every direction. And Peter was enjoying every second of it. "I always tried to guide her," he continued lightly, as if sharing a harmless memory. "But ambition without ability is just noise." A few soft laughs slipped out from scattered corners of the room, uncertain but real enough to sting. Mirabelle did not argue. She did not interrupt. She did not defend herself. She simply let him speak, her posture straight, her expression calm, her silence heavier than any protest. Because Peter believed she had come alone tonight. He believed she had nothing. He believed she was still the woman he had diminished, corrected, reshaped, and finally discarded. He believed the story in his head was still the truth. What he did not know, what no one in that room knew, was that the elevator doors downstairs had just opened with a quiet chime, and the man stepping out of it was walking with purpose, with certainty, and with absolutely no intention of letting this humiliation continue. What he did not know was that before this night was over, he would regret ever standing up. If you have ever been humiliated in public, ever been dismissed, doubted, or told you were not enough, stay with me. Because this story is about a woman who learned that the quiet ones are often the most dangerous. And sometimes, the greatest revenge is not revenge at all. Sometimes, it is success. Before we dive into this incredible journey, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You will not want to miss what happens next. Now, let's begin. The penthouse sat 42 stories above Chicago. From the floor-to-ceiling windows, you could see Lake Michigan stretching out like a mirror, reflecting the city lights back up to the sky. Mirabelle Jenkins stood at one of those windows, holding a glass of water with lemon. Not wine. Never wine. She had learned that alcohol made her make decisions she would regret, and she had already made enough mistakes to last 2 lifetimes. Her reflection in the glass looked back at her. At 34 years old, Mirabelle had the kind of face that made people underestimate her. Soft features, warm brown eyes, a gentle mouth that smiled easily. People looked at her and saw kindness. They did not see the steel underneath. They did not see someone who had already survived what most people only read about in books. She had survived being married to a man who told her every day that she was not enough. "The caterers are downstairs," a voice said behind her. Keisha came into the room like she always did, without knocking, carrying a tablet and wearing her work face. Keisha had been with Mirabelle for 3 years now, and she was the only person in this penthouse who knew the whole truth. "They want to know about the appetizer order, the one you wanted, the spinach and feta bites with the lemon herb sauce, yes," Mirabelle said quietly, still looking out at the city. "Tell them that is fine. Tell them everything is fine." Keisha paused. She was Mirabelle's personal assistant, but she was also becoming her friend. And friends could read the tension in someone's shoulders, even from across a room. "He is not going to hurt you tonight," Keisha said. It was not a question. It was a statement, a promise. "I know," Mirabelle replied, but she did not know, not really. The truth was that Mirabelle Jenkins Lawson had not seen her ex-husband in 6 months, not since the papers were signed, not since she walked out of the courthouse with her head held high and her heart absolutely shattered. Peter had been everything she thought she wanted when she married him at 25, smart, ambitious, from a good family, the kind of man that made her parents proud, the kind of man that made her feel like she had finally won the game of life. And then, slowly, he had dismantled everything about her that was not small enough to fit into his vision of what a wife should be. "You cannot wear that dress to the fundraiser. You look too available. Your laugh is too loud. People will think you are desperate for attention. Do not apply for that job. It will make me look bad. What will people think if my wife makes more money than I do?" And the worst one, the one that echoed through her nightmares even now, even after everything. "Nobody else would ever want you. You are lucky I stay." But Peter had miscalculated something very important. He had not counted on the fact that Mirabelle was stronger than she seemed, and he absolutely had not counted on Anderson Lawson. She met Anderson exactly 1 month after the divorce was finalized. It was at a benefit for inner-city youth programs, the kind of event where Chicago's wealthiest people gathered to feel good about themselves while drinking champagne that cost more than some people's monthly rent. Mirabelle had almost not gone. She was still in the phase where being around happy couples made her feel like she was bleeding internally. But Keisha had dragged her. "You need to get out of that penthouse and remember what the world looks like," Keisha had said, and Keisha was right. Anderson Lawson was tall. Not basketball player tall, but tall enough that when he stood next to Mirabelle, she felt small and safe. He had the kind of presence that made people listen when he spoke. His voice was deep, with a slight rasp to it that suggested he had once smoked and had since quit. He wore his power like other men wore cologne, invisible but impossible to ignore. The first time he spoke to her, they were standing near the silent auction table. Mirabelle had been looking at the vacation packages that nobody wanted, the ones offered by resorts that had given them complimentary slots in the auction just to get their name in the program. "That one is terrible," he said, pointing to a weeks-long stay in the Maldives. "I went there once. The resort is overbooked. You spend more time waiting in line than you do relaxing." Mirabelle laughed. It was the first real laugh she had made in months. Then why would anyone bid on it? "Because people do not read the fine print," he said simply. He turned to look at her, and Mirabelle felt something shift inside her chest. "I am Anderson Lawson." "Mirabelle Jenkins," she replied. He did not ask her if she was single. He did not ask her for her phone number. Instead, he asked her what she wanted to do with her life. Just like that. Like it was a normal question, the kind you asked someone you had just met at a charity event. And Mirabelle, because she was tired and heartbroken and had nothing left to lose, told him the truth. She told him about her marketing degree that she had abandoned to support Peter's business. She told him about the app idea she had been sitting on for 5 years, the one she had never developed because Peter said it was not viable. She told him about the woman she used to be, before marriage had shrunk her down to something smaller and more manageable. Anderson listened to every word, and when she was done, he said only one thing: develop it. That was 6 months ago. Now, Anderson owned the largest tech company in Illinois. He was on the cover of Forbes at least once a year. He had never been married, though there had been a long-term relationship once that ended, because the woman wanted marriage and children, and Anderson wanted to build his empire. He was 37 years old and had already made his first billion by 34. He was also, as of 1 year ago, Mirabelle's husband. It had surprised everyone. The media called it a whirlwind romance. People whispered that Mirabelle had married him for money. What they did not understand was that Mirabelle had already been developing her app idea into a full-fledged business when she met Anderson. And what they absolutely did not understand was that Anderson, underneath all that power and that controlled exterior, was surprisingly kind. He did not try to change her. He did not tell her she was not enough. He did not make her smaller. Instead, he gave her space to grow, and when she grew, he celebrated it. 6 months ago, her app had launched. It was called Nexus. It was a project management and communication tool for small businesses. It had never been marketed as anything special, but within 3 months, it had over 100,000 users. Within 6 months, it had 1 million. And Mirabelle, the woman who had once been told she was not capable of managing her own career, was now worth approximately $60 million. Peter had not taken it well. He had called her, emailed her, sent lawyers letters, and now tonight he had done something that had made Anderson go very still and very quiet in a way that scared Mirabelle. He had inserted himself into tonight's event. Peter had a business partner, a man named David Winters who owned a venture capital firm. David was one of the investors that Anderson was courting for his new venture. And Peter, because he was strategic and cruel and had nothing left to lose, had asked David to bring him to tonight's dinner. The dinner that was happening in exactly 1 hour. Mirabel, Keisha said, and her voice had changed. It was softer now. It was the voice of someone who had known about all the times Peter had made Mirabel cry in the bathroom, thinking no one could hear. He cannot touch you anymore. Do you understand? He has no power here. Mirabel turned away from the window. She looked at Keisha, this woman who had become her anchor in the storm, and she smiled. It was a small smile, but it was real. I know, she said, and this time when she said it, she meant it. By 8 o'clock, the ballroom of the penthouse was full of Chicago's elite. There were venture capitalists with sharp eyes and sharper teeth. There were entrepreneurs who had sold their companies for millions and were now bored with their lives. There were socialites in dresses that cost more than cars. And there was Mirabel, standing at the top of the entrance to the ballroom in a floor-length Valentino gown that was the color of old gold, with her natural hair in an elegant updo, looking like she belonged in this world so completely that nobody would ever believe that 2 years ago she was making spreadsheets for her ex-husband while he talked on the phone to his friends about how nobody respected his wife's little ideas. Anderson was on the other side of the room, talking to a group of investors. He was laughing at something one of them had said, and his eyes kept finding hers across the crowd. Every time they did, he would smile a little wider, like she was the only good thing in the room. She loved that about him. She had not known she needed that. She had not known how starved she was for someone to love her simply because she was herself. Keisha appeared at her elbow with a flute of sparkling water. Mirabel took it and drank half of it in one long sip. Her nerves were sitting right under her skin, making her hands feel shaky. Do not look now, Keisha said very quietly, but your ex-husband just walked in. Mirabel took a breath, then another. Then she turned slowly, casually, like she had not been told specifically not to look, which of course meant the opposite of what Keisha had said. Peter Jenkins still looked the same, still wore his ambition like a suit, still had that smile that had once made Mirabel's heart race, but that now made her feel a little sick. He was with David Winters, who was looking around the ballroom like he was calculating how much everything cost. And then Peter's eyes found Mirabel. She watched as his expression changed, surprise, calculation, and then something darker, something that looked like anger mixed with something else. Hunger, maybe, or regret. It was hard to tell with Peter. He said something to David, and then started moving through the crowd toward her. Mirabel felt her heart start to race, not in a good way, in a way that made her remember the sound of Peter's voice when he was disappointed, in a way that made her remember the weight of his disappointment settling over her like a blanket. But then Anderson was there. He appeared beside her like he had known she needed him, which maybe he had. They had been married long enough that sometimes they could communicate without words. Anderson took her hand and brought it to his lips, kissing the back of it in a gesture that was both tender and very clearly a statement of ownership. It was nothing crude. It was nothing that said she belonged to him. It was something that said that he was hers, and he wanted everyone in the room to know it. Peter stopped walking. Anderson's hand stayed in the small of Mirabel's back. His expression remained pleasant. He turned slightly, acknowledging Peter with a nod that was polite but dismissive, the kind of nod you gave to someone who existed but who was not important enough to warrant a full greeting. Peter's jaw clenched, and Mirabel felt something shift inside her. This was the moment. This was the moment where everything could go wrong. Peter was going to say something cutting. Peter was going to remind her of how small she used to be. Peter was going to try to make the room spin the way he used to make it spin when they were married. But then Anderson turned back to Mirabel and asked her to dance. It was a small gathering. There was a live band playing smooth jazz in the corner. A few couples were already dancing on the small dance floor. It was not the kind of thing Anderson usually did. He had told her once in the early days of their relationship that he did not like being the center of attention. But now, he was leading her to the dance floor, and he was pulling her clothes, and he was holding her like she was the most valuable thing he had ever touched. And as they danced, Mirabelle could feel the room watching them. She could feel Peter's eyes on her back. She could feel the shift in the conversation, the way people's voices changed when they realized whose wife was dancing with him. She could feel all of it, and it would have terrified her once. But now, with Anderson's hand on her waist and his heartbeat steady underneath her palm, it felt like proof. Proof that she had made it out. Proof that she had become more than what Peter had told her she was. Proof that she was exactly enough. When the song ended, Anderson brought her back to the edge of the ballroom. He kissed her forehead and excused himself to talk to a group of investors. Mirabelle watched him go, then turned back to look at the party. And that was when Peter made his move. He approached her like he owned the space, like the ballroom was his to cross. His smile was fixed in place, but his eyes were cold. "Mirabelle," he said, and his voice was warm like he was greeting an old friend. Like he had not spent the first 5 years of their marriage making her believe that she was not smart enough for him. "It has been a long time." Mirabelle turned to face him fully. She set her drink down on a nearby table. When she spoke, her voice was steady. "Peter, I heard about your little app," he continued, moving slightly closer. His voice was just loud enough that nearby guests could hear, but not so loud that it seemed like he was trying to make a scene. That was very Peter, always calculating the optics. "That is wonderful, really. I am so glad you were able to find something to keep yourself busy with." There it was, the first cut. The implication that what she had built was not real, that it was a hobby, that it was nothing compared to what he did. "Thank you," Mirabelle said. She smiled. It was the smile she had perfected over years of marketing. It showed nothing. It revealed nothing. It has been very successful. "Of course," Peter said, and then he laughed. A small, sad laugh, like he was laughing at a joke she had told that she did not understand. "I always said you had potential. I just did not think you would actually do anything with it. But then again, you always did need someone to believe in you, did you not?" The implication was clear. He was implying that Anderson was the only reason her app had succeeded, that she was a passenger in her own success, that she had not built this, that someone else had. Mirabelle felt something cold settle in her chest. This was a moment. This was one of those moments where everything could go one of two ways. She could either let him make her small again, or she could stand in her power. "Actually," she said, and her voice was still steady, "I developed the original concept in 2019 while we were still married. You told me it was not viable. You told me I should not waste my time. I shelved it for 5 years. I started working on it again after our divorce. I did not show the prototype to Anderson until it was almost complete, and I did not tell him about it to impress him. I told him because he asked me what I wanted to do with my life, and I was telling the truth." Peter's smile did not change, but something flickered behind his eyes. Anger, embarrassment, the understanding that she had just publicly, gently, demolished the narrative he was trying to create. "Well," he said, "I always knew you had more potential than I could help you reach. I am glad that your current situation has been able to bring it out." The word "situation" was meant to sting. It was meant to imply that her marriage to Anderson was not real, that it was temporary, that it was something less than what they had. "My marriage to Anderson is not a situation," Mirabelle said quietly. "It is a partnership with someone who respects me, which is something I never had with you." And then, because she was done talking to him, because she had said what she needed to say, she turned away and walked toward Keisha, who was standing near the refreshment table with her eyes wide and her expression somewhere between shocked and delighted. "Did you just?" Keisha started to say. "I did," Mirabelle confirmed. But as she was turning, she caught sight of Peter's face, and what she saw there made her blood run cold, because Peter was not angry. Peter was calculating. Peter was looking at her like he was already several moves ahead. And Mirabelle suddenly understood that this was not over. This was just the beginning. The dinner was served at 9. Mirabel and Anderson sat at the head table, with various investors and business partners arranged strategically around them. Peter was at a table across the room, but he was not looking away. He was not pretending to be interested in the conversation happening around him. He was watching Mirabel like a hunter watches prey. Keisha, who was helping to coordinate the event, came up behind Mirabel and squeezed her shoulder. When Mirabel looked back, she caught the warning in her assistant's eyes. Something was about to happen. Keisha could sense it the same way Mirabel could. And then, as the main course was being cleared away, Peter stood up. He stood up, and he picked up his wine glass, and he looked around the ballroom until he had everyone's attention. "I would like to make a toast," he said. His voice cut through the room like a knife. Anderson's hand tightened on Mirabel's thigh. She could feel him tense beside her. Peter raised his glass higher. "I would like to toast my ex-wife Mirabel, an extraordinary woman who has accomplished so much in such a short amount of time. I remember when she was just a girl with big dreams and no way to achieve them, and I watched her with so much patience as I tried to guide her toward a more realistic path. And now, look at her. She has married a man with the resources to make those dreams come true. She has surrounded herself with the kind of infrastructure that allows someone with limited experience to present themselves as a self-made success." Mirabel's hands clenched underneath the table. "But I think the most impressive thing about Mirabel," Peter continued, and now his voice was dripping with a kind of false sweetness that made Mirabel's skin crawl, "is her ability to adapt, to change herself to fit whatever situation she finds herself in. That is a skill. Not a talent necessarily, but a skill. And in business, in life, adaptability is worth a great deal." He paused, he took a sip of his wine, and then he delivered the final blow. "I would also like to toast to her loyalty to the men who believe in her. First to me, for 5 years where she showed such remarkable devotion. And now to Anderson, whose wealth and power have allowed her to finally become someone. I hope, my darling, that when he tires of you, and men like Anderson do tire of wives eventually, that you can adapt again, that you can find another situation to insert yourself into." The room went silent. Mirabel felt her heart stop, not because of what Peter had said, but because of what he was implying. He was implying that she was a gold digger. He was implying that her marriage was transactional. He was implying that the only reason she was successful was because of the man she was sleeping with. And he had done it in front of every powerful person in Chicago. Around the table, Mirabel could see people looking at each other, could see the narrative forming in their minds. She could see the women judging her. She could see the men wondering if Peter's words had any merit. She could see her entire life becoming small again. Peter was still standing, was still smiling that cold smile. "So here is to Mirabel," he said. "May you continue to adapt. May you continue to find strong men to believe in you, because we both know that you do not have what it takes to stand alone." He raised his glass. And nobody drank. Mirabel stood up. She did not think about it. She did not plan it. She just stood up, and she was moving, and she was walking toward Peter, and she was holding all of that hurt and anger and betrayal in her eyes. She was terrified that she would cry. She was determined that she would not. She got to Peter, and she looked up at him, and she opened her mouth to say something that would cut him the way his words had just cut her. And then Anderson was there. He was suddenly, impossibly in front of her. He was tall and powerful, and he was looking at Peter with an expression so cold that several people at nearby tables actually gasped. "I think you should leave," Anderson said. His voice was quiet, but it was the kind of quiet that sounded like thunder. Peter smiled, but it wavered. "I am just having a bit of fun with my ex-wife. Surely you can appreciate a little good-natured humor between two people who—" "I said," Anderson repeated, and now his voice had an edge to it that made people shift in their seats, "that you should leave." Peter looked around the room, gauging the mood. Mirabel could see him calculating whether it was worth it to push back, whether the audience was still on his side. And then he must have realized that they were not, because the smile faded from his face, and he set down his wine glass with deliberate care. "Of course," he said smoothly, like he had planned this all along, like the exit was his idea. "I was just leaving anyway. David, shall we?" And he walked out of the ballroom like he was royalty, like he had not just been publicly dismissed by the most powerful man in the room. But Mirabel was shaking, not with relief, with rage, with humiliation, with the horrible realization that even though she had escaped him, even though she had built something incredible, even though she was successful and married and happy, he still had the power to make her feel small. He had still found a way to make everyone question her. He had still managed to plant a seed of doubt in the minds of everyone in that room. She looked around at the faces. She could see it, the pity, the judgment, the unspoken question. Was she really the self-made success she claimed to be, or was she just another woman riding on a man's coattails? Anderson turned toward her. He reached out and cupped her face in his hands. His eyes were dark with something that looked like anger, but there was also something else there. Something that looked like deep, abiding love. "Do you want to know what I am thinking right now?" he asked quietly. Mirabel shook her head. She could not speak. "I am thinking," Anderson said, "that I want everyone in this room to know the truth, but not the truth he was selling, the real truth." And with that, he turned around, and he walked to the center of the ballroom, and he clapped his hands once to get everyone's attention. "If you want to know what happens next," the voice in the story says at this moment, "if you want to see Anderson defend Mirabel in front of all of Chicago's elite, make sure you are subscribed to this channel. Hit that like button and leave a comment telling me what you think Mirabel should do." The entire ballroom was silent. Anderson stood in the center of the dance floor, commanding the room the way he commanded every space he entered. The live band had stopped playing. The servers had paused with their trays. Even the ambient conversation had died down to almost nothing. Mirabel felt Keisha grab her hand from somewhere behind her. She could feel the warmth of her assistant's support like an anchor. Anderson looked at his wife, just looked at her for a moment like he was gathering his thoughts, and then he turned back to face the room. "I want to tell you all something," he said. His voice was not loud, but it carried. "About the woman standing over there in the gold dress, about Mirabel Lawson." Mirabel held her breath. 2 years ago, I met Mirabel at a charity event. She was not looking for a husband. She was not looking for money. She was not looking for anything except a way to build something that was hers, something that nobody could take away from her. And at that charity event, when I asked her what she wanted to do with her life, she told me the truth. She told me about an app concept that she had developed years earlier, a concept that her ex-husband had told her was not viable, that she was not smart enough to execute. Anderson paused. He let that sink in. "I told her to develop it, that was all. I did not write a single line of code. I did not design a single feature. I did not build her company. Mirabel did. Mirabel, with her intelligence and her work ethic and her absolute refusal to stay small. The woman who your ex-husband just called an adapter is someone who took her own vision and built it into a company that is now worth more than some of the ventures in this very room. She did that, not me. Her." He looked back at Mirabel, and when their eyes met, something in her chest cracked open. "And I married her not because I wanted to own her, or because I wanted to add her to my collection of accomplishments. I married her because I respect her, because she is extraordinary, and because when I saw what she was capable of, I knew that I wanted to spend my life with someone of that caliber." Anderson turned back to address the room more broadly. "The ex-husband who just stood in this ballroom and publicly humiliated the woman I love is a man who feared her success. He had to tell himself that she was weak in order to feel strong. He had to believe that she was dependent on him in order to feel important. And when she left him and went on to accomplish everything he said she could not accomplish, it broke something inside him. Instead of celebrating her success, he came here tonight to try to diminish it, to plant seeds of doubt about her character. And I am telling you right now, in front of all of you, that every single word he said was a lie designed to make himself feel better about his own inadequacy. A woman at one of the nearby tables started clapping. Mirabelle recognized her. She was a venture capitalist, one of the most successful women in Chicago, and as she clapped, others joined in. First one table, then another, until the entire ballroom was standing and applauding. Mirabelle felt tears on her cheeks, not tears of sadness, tears of relief, tears of vindication, tears of finally being seen. Anderson came back to her side. He took her hand and led her to the center of the ballroom, and for the second time that evening, they were the center of everyone's attention. But this time, it was different. This time, it was not about him protecting her. It was about him celebrating her. And when he kissed her, it felt like the whole room was bearing witness to something sacred. The party continued for another hour, but the energy had shifted. People came up to Mirabelle and wanted to talk to her. They wanted to know about her app. They wanted to know about her journey. They wanted to invest in her next venture. Several women pulled her aside to tell her that they had recognized themselves in her story, that they had been made small by the men they loved, and that watching her stand in her power had given them hope. By the time the last guest left, it was nearly midnight. The servers were clearing tables. The band was packing up, and Mirabelle was exhausted in a way that sleep could not fix. Anderson had his jacket off, his cufflinks undone. He was in his office going over contracts. He always worked late. It was one of the things that Mirabelle had learned about him in their year of marriage. He could go to sleep thinking about a problem and wake up with 17 solutions. But tonight, when she knocked on the doorframe, he looked up immediately and set everything aside. "Come here," he said, and she did. She sat on his lap, and he wrapped his arms around her, and they sat like that in silence for a long time. Mirabelle was thinking about what Peter had said. Even though Anderson had publicly defended her, even though the room had applauded her, she could not stop thinking about his words, about the way he had framed her success as dependent on the men around her. "Do you think he was right?" she asked quietly. "About me being an adapter, about needing a strong man to—" "No," Anderson said firmly. "I think he was a coward who could not stand the fact that you became something he said you could never be. I think he needed to make you small again because your success was a mirror that showed him exactly what he was. And what he is, Mirabelle, is a man who is afraid of strong women." Mirabelle nodded, but something in her was still unsettled. "Why did you marry me?" she asked. It was not a new question, but it felt different now. It felt heavier. Anderson was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Because I was afraid." Mirabelle pulled back to look at him. Afraid of what? Afraid that I would never meet someone who would make me want to give up the empire I had built. And then I met you, and you were not asking me to give anything up. You were building your own empire. And I realized that what I had been looking for my whole life was someone who was my equal. Someone I could build a life with, not someone I could rule over. He kissed her forehead. "I married you because you are extraordinary, not because I wanted to be with someone I could control, but because I wanted to be with someone who would challenge me every single day to be better." Mirabelle nodded against his chest, and then quietly she told him something she had never told anyone. "I think I am still afraid sometimes, not of Peter, but of becoming that woman again, the one who made herself smaller, the one who apologized for taking up space." "You will not," Anderson said, and he sounded so certain that Mirabelle almost believed him. "Because now you know what it is like to be seen, and I do not think you will ever be able to go back to being invisible." They went to bed after that. Anderson fell asleep with his arm around her waist, and Mirabelle lay there in the darkness, listening to the city sounds from outside the window, feeling the weight of his arm around her, and trying to believe that what he had said was true. 3 days later, everything changed. Mirabelle was in her home office when Keisha came in with her laptop, and an expression that said something very bad had happened. "You need to see this," Keisha said, not bothering with a greeting. Mirabelle's stomach dropped. She had learned that when Keisha said you needed to see something, it was never good news. Keisha turned the laptop around. It was an article from a business news website. The headline made Mirabelle's blood run cold. Nexus startup faces intellectual property lawsuit. Founder's ex-husband claims he developed the original concept. Mirabelle felt her chest tighten. She read the article quickly, her eyes scanning for the relevant details. Peter was suing her. He was claiming that the original concept for Nexus was his, that he had come up with the idea in the early days of their marriage, that Mirabelle had stolen it from him and passed it off as her own creation. And he was naming Anderson as a co-defendant, claiming that Anderson had known about the copyright infringement and had helped to cover it up. "No," Mirabelle whispered. "No, that is not true. The concept was mine. I have my original notebooks. I have my code repository with timestamps. He is also going to the press," Keisha said quietly. "He has already sent out a statement saying that he has evidence that you plagiarized your entire concept from his work. He is calling it a scandal. He is saying that you and Anderson covered it up together." Mirabelle felt the room spin. This was worse than the dinner party. This was a strategic attack on her integrity. This was Peter trying to destroy not just her reputation, but her marriage and her business all at once. "Anderson needs to know," Mirabelle said. She was already standing up, was already moving toward the door. But Keisha grabbed her arm. "He already does," Keisha said quietly. "I sent him the articles an hour ago. He is in the conference room with his lawyers right now." Mirabelle went downstairs. The conference room was on the 42nd floor, overlooking the entire city. But today, with the windows showing nothing but gray sky, it felt like a cage. Anderson was at the head of the table with two lawyers on either side of him. When she came in, he looked up. His expression was unreadable. "Mirabelle," he said, and he gestured for her to sit next to him. She did, and as she sat down, she realized that this was the moment. This was the moment where everything could fall apart, because now her success was under question. Now Anderson could claim that he had made a mistake. Now he could decide that she was not worth the fight. "Peter Jenkins is lying," one of the lawyers said. His name was Richard, and he had a gray beard and the demeanor of someone who had fought many battles. "The evidence will prove that, but we need to move quickly. We need to establish a timeline. We need to find your original notebooks, your code repositories, any evidence that the concept predates his claims." "I have all of that," Mirabelle said. Her voice sounded strange in her own ears, small. "Good," Richard said, "because this is going to be a long fight. A very public, very expensive long fight. This is not just about intellectual property anymore. This is about Peter Jenkins trying to destroy your reputation, and by extension, trying to damage this company and Anderson Lawson's holdings." Anderson had not said anything yet. He was looking at Mirabelle with an expression that made her nervous, like he was looking at a puzzle he could not quite solve. "Anderson," Richard said, turning to him, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. Did you have any knowledge that the Nexus concept might have originated from Peter Jenkins?" "No," Anderson said. He was still looking at Mirabelle. "I did not." "Did you ever do any business with Peter Jenkins? Did you ever discuss the app idea with him?" "Never," Anderson said. "Did you help Mirabelle develop the concept? Did you contribute to the code or the design?" "No," Anderson said. "I told her to develop it, that was all. The rest was hers." Richard nodded, satisfied. He turned back to Mirabelle. "You are going to need to be prepared for very personal questions. They are going to ask you about your marriage. They are going to ask you about why you did not pursue this idea while you were still married to Peter. They are going to try to paint a picture of a woman who was too weak to succeed on her own. And you are going to have to stand in front of a judge and refute every single accusation." Mirabelle nodded. She understood. She had known from the moment she saw that headline that this was not going to be a simple matter of presenting evidence. This was going to be a matter of her character being put on trial. "There is something else," the second lawyer said. Her name was Patricia, and she had sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. Peter Jenkins is claiming that Anderson Lawson paid him off to stay silent about the intellectual property issues. He is claiming that you both knew the app concept was stolen and that you paid him to not pursue legal action. Mirabel and Anderson both started to speak at the same time, but Patricia held up her hand. I know it is not true, but he is going to claim it in depositions. He is going to try to prove it in court. And when he does, we are going to have a very hard time disproving a negative. So what we need is evidence that shows you did not have any knowledge of this supposed ownership issue. We need your original work, your creative process, anything that shows that this concept was entirely yours. For the first time, Anderson reached over and took Mirabel's hand. He squeezed it gently. It was a gesture of solidarity, a gesture that said, I am still here. But Mirabel could feel the tension in his grip. She could feel that something had changed. After the lawyers left, Anderson asked Mirabel to stay in the conference room. When they were alone, he stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. I need you to tell me the truth, he said. His voice was quiet, but it was not gentle. In your marriage to Peter, did he ever actually contribute to the app concept? Did he ever actually help you develop the idea? No, Mirabel said firmly. Never. He told me it was not viable. He told me not to waste my time. That is why I stopped working on it. But you kept your original notebooks, your code. Yes, Mirabel said. I have everything. Then we will win this, Anderson said. But Mirabel, I need you to understand something. This is going to be very difficult. This is going to be public. And there are going to be people who believe Peter's version of events even when the evidence proves you are telling the truth. People do not change their minds easily. And some people will always think of you as the woman who stole her success from her ex-husband. I know, Mirabel said quietly. Do you? Anderson asked, and now he turned to look at her. Do you really understand what you are about to go through? Mirabel stood up. She was not going to sit down while he looked at her like she was a problem he was not sure how to solve. I know that Peter is a liar. I know that I built Nexus. I know that everything I have accomplished is a result of my own work. And I know that this is going to be awful, but I am not going to let him make me feel like I did something wrong when I did not. Anderson looked at her for a long moment, and then he walked toward her, and he wrapped her in his arms, and he held her like she was something fragile. I am sorry, he said into her hair. I am sorry that he is doing this. I am sorry that my question implied that I doubted you. I was just afraid. I was afraid that this might be something that I could not fix with money or power, something that I could not control. Mirabel held on to him, grateful that he was still here, grateful that he was still choosing her. But she also understood in that moment that Anderson was not invincible, that his power and his money and his influence could not solve every problem, and that from this point forward she was going to have to fight for herself, with or without him. The courtroom was going to be in Cook County. The judge assigned to the case was the Honorable Margaret Chen, a woman in her 60s with a reputation for being fair but unmoved by theatrics. Anderson's legal team had explained this to Mirabel in detail. She wants facts, Richard had said. She will not care about your feelings or Peter's emotions. She will care only about evidence and law. In the 3 weeks leading up to the trial, Mirabel's life became something other than life. It became a performance. It became a series of depositions and meetings and photo sessions for the media, who had picked up the story and were running with it like wolves with fresh meat. Some of the headlines were sympathetic to her. Self-made woman stands against ex-husband's lies, one publication declared, but others were less kind. Did the billionaire's wife steal her success? Another asked. And the worst one, the one that made Mirabel cry, was simply, the woman behind the man behind the app. Keisha stayed by her side through all of it. Keisha had taken a leave of absence from her job to help Mirabel prepare for the trial. She helped her organize her original notebooks. She helped her practice her testimony. She helped her breathe when the anxiety became too much. Anderson was also there, but differently. He had his own team handling the case against him, trying to prove that he had not conspired with Mirabel to cover up any intellectual property theft. It was a strange experience, being married to someone who was technically on the same side as you but whose legal defense was separate from your own. "It is just procedure," Anderson explained, seeing the hurt on Mirabel's face. "It does not mean we are not together in this." But Mirabel felt the distance anyway. She felt it in the way they moved through the penthouse like people living in the same space, but not really inhabiting it together. She felt it in the way that Anderson sometimes looked at her like he was trying to decide if she was worth all of this trouble. 2 weeks before the trial, Mirabel had a breakdown. She was in her home office, surrounded by her original notebooks, the physical proof of her creativity and her work. She was looking at the sketches she had made of the app's interface in 2019, when she was still married to Peter and still believed that he had her best interests in mind. She was looking at the notes in her handwriting where she described the original concept, at a time when nobody else in the world had heard of Nexus or believed that it could be anything more than a dream. And she realized that none of it mattered. Even if she won, even if the judge ruled in her favor and awarded her the victory, there would be people who believed Peter's version of events. There would be investors who would wonder if she had really done the work or if she had just gotten lucky by marrying a rich man. There would be articles that suggested she had stolen from her ex-husband, and those articles would come up in Google searches for the rest of her life. Peter had managed to permanently stain her success. She was sitting on the floor of her office, surrounded by the evidence of her own intelligence and creativity, and she was crying. She was crying the way she had cried in the early days of her marriage to Peter, when she was still learning that safety was not something she could count on. Anderson found her like that. He came into the office, and he saw her surrounded by notebooks and papers, and he understood immediately what was happening. "I cannot do this," Mirabel said. "I cannot stand in front of a room full of people and defend my own intelligence. I cannot prove that I am smart enough to have built my own company. That should not be something I have to prove." Anderson sat down next to her, not caring that he was getting papers and dust on his expensive suit. He did not try to fix it. He just sat there with her. "You are right," he said. "It should not be something you have to prove, but you do. Because there are people in this world who need women to be smaller than they are, who need women to be dependent on them so that they can feel like they have value. And those people will always try to take what you have built and claim it for themselves. That is not a reflection on you. That is a reflection on them." "I am tired," Mirabel said. "I am tired of fighting. I am tired of defending myself. I just want to have built something and have that be enough. I do not want to have to explain how I did it or justify that it was really me." "I know," Anderson said, and he sounded genuinely sad when he said it. "Sometimes I wonder if this marriage was a mistake," Mirabel continued, and the words just kept coming like they had been waiting for a moment of weakness to escape. "Because you are part of this now. This lawsuit is about both of us, and I pulled you into this just by existing, just by building something that made Peter jealous." "Listen to me," Anderson said, and he turned her to face him. His dark eyes were serious. "Peter Jenkins did this, not you. Do not let him convince you that his actions are your fault. That is what he has always done. He has always made his cruelty your responsibility. And you have spent so many years believing that his anger is something you caused, something you should have prevented." He took her face in his hands. "But it is not. The only person responsible for Peter's choices is Peter, and do not let him turn you against yourself. Do not let him do what he has been unable to do in any other way." Mirabel nodded. She wanted to believe him, but belief felt fragile, like it could break if she held onto it too tightly. The courtroom on the morning of the trial was exactly what Mirabel had expected it to be: bland, official, cold. There was a jury of 12 people, their faces carefully neutral, their eyes giving nothing away. There was Judge Margaret Chen at the bench, already looking like she was tired of whatever she was about to hear. There was Peter Jenkins at the plaintiff's table, looking confident in a way that made Mirabel want to scream. And there was her lawyer, Patricia, arranging documents and preparing for battle. Mirabel was wearing a navy suit, not black because Patricia had said that black made her look like a widow, not white because white would make her look innocent in a way that was patronizing. Navy was perfect, Patricia had said. Navy said I am a professional who has accomplished things, without saying too much. Anderson was in the courtroom, but he was sitting at a separate table with his own lawyers. They were allowed to observe, but they could not sit together. The symbolism of it made Mirabel feel sick. The judge opened the proceedings by laying out the case. Peter Jenkins was claiming intellectual property theft. He was claiming that he had developed the original concept for Nexus, that he had shared it with his wife, and that she had stolen it to start her own company. He was asking for a settlement of $50 million plus damages. Mirabel, through her lawyers, was claiming that she had independently developed the concept, that she had never stolen anything from Peter Jenkins, and that any accusations to that effect were false and defamatory. Peter's lawyer, a man named Marcus Stone who had a reputation for being ruthless, stood up first. He presented his case with the confidence of a man who believed he was going to win. He talked about Peter's vision for app development. He talked about how Peter had shared his ideas with his wife. He presented emails and documents that, taken out of context, seemed to suggest that Peter had been involved in the concept's development. But Mirabel recognized those emails. She had seen them before. They were from her marriage, from the early days when she and Peter had discussed work in the evenings. The emails where she had talked about her app idea and Peter had responded with criticism rather than support. When it came time for Mirabel to testify, she stood up on legs that felt like they might not hold her. She placed her hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. And then she sat in the witness box, and she looked out at the room, and she made a choice. She decided that she was going to speak as if her life depended on it, because it did. Patricia started with the basics. She asked Mirabel to explain her educational background. She asked her to walk through her career history. She asked her to describe her first encounters with app development and coding. And then she asked her the central question: when did you first conceive of the Nexus concept? Mirabel took a breath. I first started thinking about the concept in late 2018, she said. I was working in a marketing role at a small startup. I was frustrated with the communication and project management tools that were available. I felt like there was a gap in the market for something that was intuitive and powerful at the same time. I started taking notes about it in early 2019. I created sketches of the interface. I started writing code for a prototype. And when did you share this idea with your then-husband, Peter Jenkins? Patricia asked. I did not share the full idea with him, Mirabel said. I mentioned it to him a few times, but he was not interested. He told me it was not viable. He told me that I should focus on my day job instead of wasting time on a side project. Do you have documentation of these conversations? Patricia asked. I have emails, Mirabel said. I have my original notebooks. I have my computer's development history showing when I created the original code. All of it is timestamped to 2019, long before I separated from Peter. Patricia presented the evidence. She walked the jury through Mirabel's notebooks, showing them the original sketches, the evolution of the app's design over months of work. She showed them the code repositories with timestamps that proved Mirabel had been working on the concept since 2019. And then it was Peter's lawyer's turn. Marcus Stone stood up and his smile was sharp. Ms. Lawson, he said, and his use of her married name to Anderson, not to Peter, was clearly deliberate. I want to go back to your relationship with your ex-husband. You were married for how long? 5 years, Mirabel said. And during those 5 years, you were financially dependent on him, were you not? No, Mirabel said. I had a job. I earned my own income. A job that paid significantly less than his income. Is that correct? Yes, but I was not dependent on him, Mirabel said firmly. And yet, you shelved your app idea for 5 years after leaving him. Is that not an indication that perhaps you did not have the expertise to develop it on your own? That perhaps you needed someone else to believe in you in order to move forward? Mirabelle saw where he was going. He was trying to make it seem like she only pursued the app after she married Anderson. He was trying to plant the seed of doubt that her success was dependent on her current husband, not her own abilities. I shelved it because I was emotionally abused by my ex-husband, Mirabelle said, and the courtroom went very quiet. He spent 5 years telling me that I was not smart enough, that my ideas were not valuable, that nobody would ever believe in me. When I left him, I had to rebuild my sense of self. I had to believe in myself again. That took time, but it was not because I was unable to develop the app. It was because I was trying to survive the aftermath of a marriage that nearly destroyed me. Marcus tried to push back. So you are claiming that Peter Jenkins was emotionally abusive. That is a strong accusation. It is not an accusation, Mirabelle said. It is a statement of fact, and it is documented in the journals I kept during that marriage, which I have provided to my legal team, though they are not relevant to this case, because this case is not about the state of my marriage. It is about intellectual property. And is it not true that after you left your marriage to Peter Jenkins, you immediately married Anderson Lawson, a billionaire CEO who had the resources to fund your app? I did not immediately marry Anderson, Mirabelle said, and he did not fund my app. I developed the app on my own time in my own home using my own knowledge and skills. Anderson Lawson provided moral support and encouragement, but he did not provide the work that built Nexus. I did. Judge Chen interrupted. Ms. Lawson, I have a question for you. The defendant's attorney is implying that your success is dependent on your marriage to Mr. Lawson. Are you saying that is not the case? Mirabelle looked directly at the judge. I am saying that my success is dependent on my own work. Anderson Lawson's support has been invaluable to me, but the intellectual property, the code, the design, the concept, all of it is mine. If I divorced Anderson Lawson tomorrow, Nexus would still be my company. Nexus would still be my success, because I built it. There was a moment of silence in the courtroom, and then someone in the gallery coughed, breaking the spell. Peter's lawyer tried a few more angles. He tried to suggest that Mirabelle had stolen designs from Peter's computer. He tried to suggest that Anderson had intimidated Peter into not pursuing the lawsuit earlier. But with each question, Mirabelle had answers, had documentation, had proof. By the end of the day, it was clear that Peter's case was falling apart. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours. They found in favor of Mirabelle Lawson. The judge ruled that Peter Jenkins had not provided sufficient evidence to prove that he had developed the Nexus concept, and that all available evidence suggested that Mirabelle had independently created the application. The judge also found Peter Jenkins liable for a portion of Mirabelle's legal fees, though not the full amount. More importantly, the judge had harsh words for Peter's case. The plaintiff has attempted to profit from his ex-wife's success by making false claims about intellectual property ownership. This court finds such behavior reprehensible and dismissive of women in technology who have worked hard to build their own companies. When the verdict was read, Mirabelle felt something release inside her chest. Not victory, exactly. Vindication was a better word. It felt like finally being believed. Anderson came to her side immediately. He did not care about the separation that his lawyers had insisted on. He wrapped his arms around her and he held her, and he whispered in her ear, "I knew you were going to win." But the victory, while real, was not as simple as Mirabelle had hoped it would be. The media coverage of the trial was extensive. Some articles celebrated her. "Woman triumphs over ex-husband's lies," one headline declared, but others were less generous. "Billionaire's wife wins legal battle but questions remain," another read. And despite the judge's ruling, despite the jury's verdict, there were people who believed Peter's version of events. There were comments on social media suggesting that Mirabelle had paid off the jury. There were business contacts who pulled away from her, not because they believed the accusations, but because they did not want to be associated with controversy. But something had changed inside Mirabel during the trial. She had stood in a courtroom and spoken her truth in front of strangers, and the strangers had believed her. She had faced her ex-husband and his accusations, and she had not crumbled. She had defended herself, and she had won. And she understood, in a way that she had not understood before, that her success did not depend on anyone believing in her. It did not depend on Anderson. It did not depend on the jury. It did not depend on the media or the public or anyone else. Her success depended on her knowing that she had built something valuable, and she knew that. She had always known that. She had just forgotten it for a while when Peter was whispering in her ear that she was not enough. 1 week after the verdict, Mirabel did something that shocked everyone. She announced that she was starting a foundation for women in technology who had experienced domestic abuse. The foundation would provide funding for those women to develop their business ideas. It would provide legal support. It would provide therapy and mentorship. When Anderson found out about the announcement, he was in the study, going over business reports. Mirabel came in and told him what she had decided to do. "I am going to use part of my settlement to fund this," she said. "I am going to take something painful and turn it into something that helps other women." Anderson looked at her for a long moment, and then he smiled. It was the first genuine, uncomplicated smile she had seen from him in weeks. "That is extraordinary," he said. "I learned from the best," Mirabel replied. "No," Anderson said, and he stood up and walked toward her. "I think you learned from yourself. I just had the privilege of watching it happen." 1 year later, Mirabel was in a conference room at the headquarters of the Nexus company. She had moved the company to a new building, one that she owned. She had a team of 100 people working for her, most of them women. She had expanded Nexus into multiple markets, and most recently, she had just sold a portion of her company to an international tech conglomerate, making her wealth official and undeniable. But the thing that made her proudest was not the sale, it was the foundation. The Mirabel Jenkins Foundation for Women in Technology had funded 23 startups in the past year. It had provided legal support to 15 women going through custody battles or divorce proceedings. It had given scholarships to women in computer science programs at universities across the country. And it had, most importantly, sent a message that Mirabel's story did not end with her husband defending her in a ballroom. It did not end with a jury ruling in her favor. It ended with her taking her pain and transforming it into something that would help the next generation of women who found themselves in situations like hers had been. Keisha was sitting across from her in the conference room. Keisha had left her assistant job and become the director of the foundation. She had found her calling in helping women. "I have an email here from one of the women we funded last year," Keisha said, reading from her tablet. "She says that her startup just crossed 1 million users. She says she could not have done it without our support. She says that knowing about your story gave her the courage to believe in herself when nobody else did." Mirabel felt tears on her cheeks again, but these were different tears. These were tears of joy. "Read me another one," she said. As Keisha read emails from the women they had helped, as she told stories of triumph and growth and resilience, Mirabel thought about Peter Jenkins. She thought about the moment in the ballroom when he had tried to make her small. She thought about the courtroom where she had stood and refused to let him rewrite her story. She also thought about something else, something that had occurred to her recently. The best revenge was not revenge at all. The best response to someone trying to diminish you was to grow so much larger that their attempts to shrink you became invisible. The best answer to someone telling you that you are not enough was to become so much more than enough that you started a foundation to help other people become enough for themselves. Peter had tried to humiliate Mirabel at a dinner party. Anderson had stepped in and defended her, but in the end, Mirabel had defended herself. She had stood in court and claimed her own success. She had won her case. She had built her company. She had started her foundation. And in doing so, she had become something that Peter could never take away from her. She had become her own hero. As the sun set over Chicago, Mirabelle stood on the balcony of the Nexus Company headquarters, looking out at the city below. She thought about where she had been a year ago. She thought about the woman in the gold dress, terrified that her ex-husband was going to destroy everything she had built. That woman had been stronger than she knew. And now, a year later, Mirabelle Jenkins Lawson understood something that she wished someone had told her all those years ago, when she was married to Peter and making herself smaller every day. Success is not about someone believing in you. Success is about you believing in yourself, no matter how many people tell you that you should not. Success is about getting back up every time someone tries to knock you down. Success is about taking your pain and transforming it into purpose. Anderson walked out onto the balcony. He had finally finished his work for the day. He came to stand beside Mirabelle, and he wrapped his arm around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "I am thinking about gratitude," Mirabelle said. "I am thinking about how grateful I am that I had someone in my corner when things were hard. But I am also thinking about how I had to learn that being in my own corner was more important than anyone else being in it." Anderson nodded. He understood what she was saying, even though she had not said all of it out loud. "Do you regret marrying me?" he asked quietly. "No," Mirabelle said immediately. "I love you, but I love you because you helped me see myself the way I had forgotten how to see myself. You did not make me successful. You just reminded me that I could be." They stood like that, looking out at the city, as the sun continued to set. And somewhere in Chicago, there was a woman who had just received a grant from the Mirabelle Jenkins Foundation. There was a woman who was about to start her own startup. There was a woman who was about to discover that she was stronger than she had been told. There was a woman who was about to become her own hero. And somewhere else, there was a man named Peter Jenkins, watching his ex-wife's success grow larger and more undeniable with each passing day. And he would spend the rest of his life knowing that he had tried to diminish someone, and that someone had refused to be diminished. The truth of this story is not about a billionaire saving his ex-wife from humiliation. It is about a woman discovering that she did not need saving. She needed support. She needed belief. She needed someone to stand next to her and tell her that she was right about herself. But the saving came from inside her. It had always been inside her. If you have ever felt like you were not enough, like you had to make yourself smaller to fit into someone else's life, like your dreams were too big and your abilities too small, I want you to hear this. You are enough. You have always been enough. You do not need someone to believe in you. Nice to have, sure, but not necessary. What you need is to believe in yourself, even when every voice around you is telling you not to. Mirabelle Jenkins did not win her case because Anderson Lawson was powerful. She won because she had documentation of her own work. She won because she had created something real. She won because she stood in a courtroom and refused to let anyone else write her story. And you can do the same thing. Whatever story is being written about you, whatever narrative you are being told about who you are and what you are capable of, you have the power to refuse it. You have the power to say, "This is not true. I am more than this." And when you say that, when you truly believe that, when you start to build a life based on your own vision rather than someone else's, that is when the real transformation happens. That is when you become unstoppable. 2 years later, Mirabelle was invited to speak at Northwestern University's School of Engineering and Applied Science. The auditorium was full of students, most of them young women who were studying computer science and technology. When Mirabelle walked onto the stage, she felt a strange sense of completion. She looked out at the faces in the crowd. She saw herself in many of them. Young, talented, full of dreams that the world had not yet told them were too big. "I want to tell you about a time when I was told that my dreams were not viable," Mirabelle began. "I want to tell you about a man who I loved, who told me that I was not smart enough to build the things I imagined. I want to tell you that he was wrong." She spent the next hour telling her story. She talked about the pain of being diminished. She talked about the courage it took to leave. She talked about the work of rebuilding yourself from scratch. She talked about the trials, literal and figurative, that she had faced. And when she was done, during the question and answer session, a young woman stood up. She could not have been more than 19 years old. "I am in an abusive relationship," the young woman said, her voice shaky. "And hearing your story made me realize that I do not have to be, that I can leave, and that even if nobody ever believes in me again, I can still believe in myself." The entire auditorium went quiet. Mirabelle got down from the stage and walked over to the young woman. She took her hands and looked into her eyes. "You are going to be okay," Mirabelle said. "It is going to be hard. It is going to be painful, but you are going to be okay, because you already know that you are strong enough. You just said it out loud." After the speech, Anderson was waiting for her in the green room. He did not say anything about the young woman or about Mirabelle's story. He just held her while she cried the kind of tears that come from knowing you have made a difference in someone's life. "I am proud of you," he said when she was done crying. "I am proud of me too," Mirabelle replied. And she meant it. In the end, that was the real victory. Not the court case, not the money, not even the foundation, though she was infinitely proud of the foundation. The real victory was Mirabelle Jenkins Lawson, standing on a stage in front of hundreds of people, telling her story, and knowing in her bones that every word was true, knowing that she had built something real, knowing that her success was her own, knowing that she was enough. And if her story could help one more woman believe the same thing about herself, then all of the pain, all of the struggle, all of the humiliation and the fighting would have been worth it. Because that is what power really is. It is not about how much money you have. It is not about how many people believe in you. It is not about how many times you have been defended by someone who loves you. Real power is knowing your own truth and refusing to let anyone else write it. Real power is standing in your own story and claiming it as yours. Real power is becoming so undeniably yourself that nobody can ever make you small again. That is the story of Mirabelle Jenkins. And if you ever felt like you were her, if you ever believed the lies that someone told you about yourself, I want you to know that her story can be your story too. All you have to do is refuse to be small. All you have to do is believe in yourself. All you have to do is stand up and claim what is yours, and refuse to let anyone else tell you who you are. That is everything.